On this Saturday night, the U.S. strike on ISIS-K.
2 high-profile ISIS targets were killed and 1 was wounded.
As the Taliban adds reinforcements at the Kabul airport. Security concerns on the campaign trail after a protest shuts down a Liberal rally. The push for Indigenous candidates.
We are committed to making sure our Parliament looks like Canada.
Global National with Robin Gill.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. U.S. President Joe Biden warns another terrorist attack is likely at Kabul's airport, and he promises the United States will follow through with more retaliatory action. Yesterday, the American military conducted a drone strike on what it described as an ISIS-K planner. The terrorist group is behind this week's suicide bombing that killed members of the U.S. military and civilians trying to escape from Afghanistan. As Redmond Shannon reports, it's become a hopeless situation for those left behind.
More panic and confusion near Kabul airport amid warnings of a new security threat. This time the gunfire and tear gas were just to disperse the crowds. Britain and France have now stopped their evacuations in advance of the US withdrawal Tuesday.
I'm afraid it's absolutely heartbreaking that we can't bring everybody out.
Mostly US evacuations continue as the hours run down before the Taliban takes control of the airport.
Area at the airport.
In Washington, details of the retaliation for Thursday's horrific bombing. A drone strike killing what the Pentagon says were 2 members of ISIS Khorasan.
They were ISIS-K planners and facilitators, and that's enough reason they're alone.
The threat of ISIS-K adds to the jeopardy faced by Western citizens and Afghans eligible to leave the country. The Canadian government is still trying to figure out how many are left behind. Global News spoke to a former Canadian Forces interpreter who is in a safe house in Kabul, his family of 6 in one room.
We were Canadian Task Force of Special Forces interpreters and workers, and all my co-workers, all of them are left behind. This is unfair. This is unfair. It makes me cry.
He and his family had been standing where the bomb went off just a day before the explosion. He knows at least one man who was killed.
He was moving to Canada. He's dead, poor man. I think he was a barber for Canadian troops in Kandahar.
He told us he knows of 30 other families in hiding in Kabul following the end of Canada's evacuations.
To go to Kandahar, in Kandahar they will kill us. To go to Pakistan, all the borders are blocked. Nothing we can do. We don't know our life, what is going on, where our life is going on. I will try my best to get to Pakistan. And I pray to God to get to Pakistan in a safe situation.
None of them are sure what comes next. All are pleading to Ottawa for help. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
The Canadian government maintains it is working around the clock to help get Afghans to safety. Let's join our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stevenson. And Mercedes, you just spoke with the Foreign Affairs Minister. What did he say Canada is doing?
I did, Robin, and that's been the big question we wanted to know from the minister for this week's edition of the West Block. He says that Canada is beginning negotiations with the Taliban. This had been a big question mark because, as you may remember, Canada's embassy closed down and completely pulled out, which meant there was no one left on the ground to carry out negotiations with the Taliban until the military got there, and we don't know whether or not they were engaged. But one of the questions people were asking is whether we were able to talk to the Taliban about getting Canadian citizens and Afghans who had helped Canada out safely, a negotiation the French and others had made. This is what Foreign Affairs Minister Marc Garneau told me about Canada's plans going forward.
That is happening in the days ahead of us, and a priority demand, in fact, it's the number one demand, is that they allow safe passage of Afghans out of the country. That is something that everybody agrees with, and that we will be establishing as a demand on the Taliban as we move forward. We don't know how they're going to react to that, but that is a primary focus in the days to come in speaking with the Taliban.
So, Robin, that is news that the Canadian government is going to begin negotiations with the Taliban. They say that Turkey and Qatar, two countries, are also negotiating with the Taliban to try to take control of the airspace around the airport, which would allow it to reopen for commercial flights.
Mercedes, what about the people still on the ground? What efforts are being made to help them?
Well, that really is the biggest question. At this point, it's mostly veterans groups who are carrying this out. I've talked to veterans who tell me that they are putting their personal savings into this, some who are selling off things like motorcycles to be able to pay for safe houses for Canadians to stay in and for Afghans who helped Canada. The Foreign Affairs Minister would not commit to whether or not the government will directly fund those efforts. They are telling people not to lose hope, that they are trying to find a way to get them out. But in the meantime, in this moment, it's really the veterans groups and the NGOs that are trying to keep people there safe as they figure out what the next steps are going to be going forward to get people out. Robin?
Mercedes Stevenson in Ottawa. And Mercedes will bring you the full interview with the Foreign Affairs Minister. That's tomorrow on the West Block here on Global. Canadians and people around the world are coming together to call attention to the crisis in Afghanistan.
Justice pour les Afghans.
Rallies were held in several cities across this country today. Protesters gathered in downtown Montreal to demand an end to the conflict. Demonstrations were also held in cities across Europe. Hundreds marched in London against the Taliban. Rallies in support of Afghans were also held in Paris and Greece. Turning to the federal election, tonight the issues are taking a backseat to security on the campaign trail. Last night, the Liberal Party had to cancel an event with its leader. Unruly anti-vaccine protesters showed up at a stop in Bolton, Ontario. As Mike Le Couteur reports, Justin Trudeau says he's never seen anything like it.
There are political protests, and then there's this. Dozens of angry demonstrators gathered at a Liberal campaign stop in Bolton, Ontario. It got so tense, the event had to be cancelled because of safety concerns. Later, at a different location, Justin Trudeau called for calm.
This is something that Canadians, all of us, need to reflect on. Because it's not who we are. It's not who we want to be as a country.
Late Friday, the Conservative candidate for the riding Trudeau was visiting tweeted that a few of his supporters were at that protest. Kyle Seaback said those people are no longer welcome on his campaign. Conservative leader Erin O'Toole says he's running a positive campaign, and there's nothing positive about what those volunteers did.
There is no positive reason, and if they were, they will no longer be involved with our campaign. Full stop.
Stop these vaccines!
Saturday, Jagmeet Singh's election bus was held up briefly by a protester who refused to let the vehicle pass. Now, earlier in the day, the NDP leader reflected on the divisive discourse that has overshadowed some of this campaign.
In some cases, political leaders attack another colleague just for the attack's sake, where the attack is just to put someone down. That, I think, is not helpful.
As some feel, the Donald Trump era south of the border sparked the type of profanity-laced politics we're now seeing during this election campaign.
People now feel that they're entitled to have their emotions and their anger put out there to prevent other people from having a political speech or a gathering.
The Liberal campaign was on a previously scheduled day off Saturday, but Trudeau's team says Friday night's protest will not change how he campaigns over the next 3 weeks. Robin?
Mike Le Couteur on the campaign trail. Thanks, Mike. At his campaign stop in Fredericton this morning, Conservative leader Erin O'Toole promised to help make life more affordable.
If you and your family aren't concerned about rising prices, well, you have 4 parties to choose from in this election.
O'Toole says his government would increase competition and lower food prices. The Conservative leader is promising to increase the maximum penalty for price fixing to $100 million and introduce criminal penalties, including jail time. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh spent the morning in Sudbury, Ontario, visiting the University of Sudbury, where he pledged to do away with interest on student loans and to forgive student debt.
We also know that students are dealing with record levels of debt, far more debt than any of us when we went to university. I remember when I went to law school, and my tuition fees are nothing compared to what they are right now. and people are struggling. Students are struggling when they graduate.
The party's campaign platform pledges to do away with up to $20,000 in debt, which would help close to 350,000 students. The New Democrats are trying to make gains with another critical segment of the electorate, the Indigenous community. The party is campaigning hard in northern parts of the country, ridings that are separated by huge distances. But as our chief political correspondent David Akin reports, these ridings have a significant Indigenous population. And for the NDP, capturing more of that vote is key.
1, 2, 3.
NDP leader Jagmeet Singh got a warm welcome when he touched down in the Northern Ontario riding of Kenora. It's a riding where more than 40% of voters are Indigenous, and where many remote and isolated communities are not keen to see campaigning outsiders in a pandemic.
We're emerging out of a pandemic. Some people are quite hesitant to be close and to have me come to their residence.
Seymour is running in a riding the size of Germany, but that's not unique. There are lots of federal and provincial ridings so big, much campaigning has to be done by plane.
That's the challenge that we have, and do we have the resources to be able to do that?
Seymour is one of 25 Indigenous people running for the NDP in this election, and the party is making a special effort to support them with dedicated staff and dedicated financial resources.
We are committed to making sure our parliament looks like Canada, and particularly helping those that have been excluded from the halls of power, have been denied access to decision-making.
Singh's attention to that effort is winning praise from nonpartisan First Nations leaders.
I think that on a personal level, he's a tremendous leader, regardless of the flag that flies behind him. I always support strong leadership, sound leadership.
Manitoba NDP leader Wab Kinew is one of just a handful of Indigenous people to ever lead a major provincial party in Canada.
I know representation matters to young people, but I hope everyone in Canada recognizes how much representation matters, because for too long, people from some of our communities weren't being represented in some of the halls of power.
Lots of Canada's big northern ridings are in play in this election. Yukon, Nunavut, northern Saskatchewan, a couple in northern Quebec, and here in northern Ontario. And they all have lots of Indigenous voters that are looking to all the parties to address their issues and their priorities. And if it's a close election, and it looks like it just might be, well, those votes could make a big difference. Robin.
David Akin in Thunder Bay, Ontario. Thanks, David. Still ahead, people are getting poisoned by taking a medicine meant for farm animals. Canada is suspending direct passenger flights from Morocco because of surging COVID-19 cases. Transport Canada cites an increase in positive test results in travelers arriving here from Morocco over the last month. The restriction will go into effect at midnight and remain in place for 30 days. Doctors in the U.S. are battling a surprising epidemic, a rash of poisonings. Patients infected with COVID-19 are self-medicating with a drug meant for livestock. As Jackson Prosko reports, it's just the latest unproven cure being pushed by anti-vaxxers.
In the U.S. South, the worst days of the pandemic have brought along an outbreak of self-inflicted illness.
It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to risk your life or your health to take unproven medications.
70% of the calls to poison control in Mississippi now involve people who've taken huge doses of ivermectin, falsely believing it can prevent COVID.
The benefits of a drug called ivermectin.
Touted as a miracle prevention and cure by far-right commentators and anti-vaxxers, ivermectin is a treatment for lice and tropical parasites, not viruses. With doctors unwilling to prescribe it for COVID, people have rushed to farm supply stores, buying and taking large doses meant to deworm livestock. Some are ending up in hospital.
The doses that we give humans is 3 milligrams and 6 milligrams. And the doses that you can get for cows and cattle is 60, 100, 200, many fold higher.
You are not a horse. You are not a cow, warned the Food and Drug Administration in a tweet this week, responding to a flurry of online misinformation about the drug.
A lot of mis and disinformation has a central kernel of truth. So there is a clinical trial to see, hey, is this really going to work? But there's nothing really proven at this point. It's purely sort of speculation.
The hydroxychloroquine
coupled with the zinc. And
the frenzy is reminiscent of former President Donald Trump's promotion of anti-malarial drugs and bleach as cures.
Injection inside or almost a cleaning.
Which also led to poisonings.
You're right to draw a line between hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin. I'm having some of those same conversations with some of the same people.
The difference now is that vaccines are widely available, studied, and proven effective. Experts warn these false cures are not only unnecessary, they're misleading, delivering nothing more than a dose of dangerous consequences. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
A storm is coming. Still ahead, Louisiana braces for the worst as Hurricane Ida approaches.
You're watching Global National.
Hurricane Ida hit Cuba late Friday with winds over 120 kilometers per hour. Trees were toppled, and there are still concerns about flooding. As much as 50 centimeters of rain fell. Ida is now picking up strength as it travels through the Gulf of Mexico. It's expected to hit Louisiana tomorrow evening, potentially as a life-threatening Category 4 hurricane.
The wind speed at landfall is projected to be sustained in the neighborhood of 140 miles per hour. This is a very strong storm. This will be one of the strongest hurricanes to hit anywhere in Louisiana since at least the 1850s.
Louisiana's governor is warning of the danger to come as preparations in his state are underway. People are filling up sandbags in an effort to protect their homes, and there are lines at gas stations as people fill up and head away from the coast. Tomorrow is the 16th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. That deadly storm made landfall as a Category 5 and caused more than 1,800 deaths and $125 billion in damage. Well, a summer of record heat and drought conditions have fueled deadly wildfires through much of western North America. And the impact on the physical environment is extending to wildlife as well. In California, there's been a devastating effect on salmon. Rob Malcolm explains.
The blistering heat wave and California drought is now to blame for not only wildfires and farming losses, but it's also wiping out fish in record numbers.
The situation's bad. What's happening in Northern California rivers is the water is too hot to allow adult salmon coming back to reproduce this year.
Thousands of salmon are dying as water levels inch lower and temperatures in rivers around California continue to rise.
We have 4 unique runs of Chinook salmon that are native to the Sacramento Valley.
Thousands of young salmon have died in the Klamath River as drought conditions fueled parasite growth, and in the Sacramento River, wildlife officials are now saying they are facing a complete loss of young Chinook salmon due to abnormally warm water.
The headline is that they are very close to extinction.
Not likely to survive the migration from the rivers to the ocean on their own, the California Department of Fish and Wildlife has stepped in, loading young salmon onto trucks and driving hours to release them into the ocean.
The solution is to put them in tanker trucks, give them a ride down to the ocean and let them go. And that's what occurred this year.
Although the biggest impact has been on young salmon, adult salmon haven't gone untouched.
Many of the adult salmon that have come back are already dying before they can even spawn. Of those that are able to spawn, their eggs, which are buried in gravel underneath the river, are dying in river water because the river water is getting too hot.
I don't know, 13-pound average maybe.
For fisherman Larry Collins, what's happening has a direct impact on his ability to put food on his table and yours.
I got fish that go to farmers markets, restaurants, like that.
The industry alone in California is worth $1.4 billion. With thousands of salmon now dying, fewer will make it to store shelves. Down the line, driving prices higher. And that sticker shock is already setting in. The implications of global warming threatening to disrupt sensitive ecosystems and wipe out entire salmon species in California, potentially having far-reaching consequences. Rob Malcolm, Global News, Sacramento.
That is Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Robin Gill. Tonight, your Canada is a beautiful sunrise taken from Prince Edward Island National Park. We'd love to see your corner of the country, so please keep sending your favorite photos to viewers at globalnational.com. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you back here tomorrow. Have a great night.